Let me ask you a question that I have asked you recently. Who are you? Anybody do some soul searching this week and think about who they are? I asked that question last week, and I said that we must locate our identity within the presence and activity of God in our story. And that gives us clarity and purpose. But there is a temptation to derive our identity other ways. We can derive identity through what I do, what I have, or what others think of me. We call these other ways idolatry. Because any time that we substitute God for something else, or I should say that the other way around, shouldn't I? Anytime we substitute something else for God, that's idolatry. And so when we place our identity in something other than in God's love, grace, provision, that's idolatry. We've made an idol out of something. And what happens is when we place our identity in an idol, then our identity lies to us. It falsely labels who we are and offers false identities. Now, Peter is a real prime example of this. He does this a lot. I think he often operates out of a false identity, at least in the Gospels. And operating out of that false identity leads to rash actions and harsh rebukes. And Peter gets both of those. I mean, some of his most famous instances are denying Jesus 3 times, chopping off the temple soldier's ear in the garden, and when he told Jesus he wasn't going to let him die, and Jesus told him, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, there aren't many rebukes that get harder than Jesus telling you, "Get behind me, Satan." But there's one particular story I want to examine today, and that's Peter at the Transfiguration. Because, I don't know if you know this, not only is it Valentine's Day, but it is also Transfiguration Sunday. So this is the day around the world the church celebrates the Transfiguration. So here's what happens. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, the inner circle, and they go up on a high mountain. And there they witness a supernatural scene. Jesus and his clothing become this dazzling white, like a white that puts tide to shame. And what is happening is that Jesus is revealing his true nature. And there's almost like this, it's almost this reminiscent throwback to the Shekinah of God in the Exodus story, where the presence of God and glory of God would come down in the temple of meeting with Moses, and he would come out and the glory of God would shine on him so strongly that he had to wear a veil to not freak people out, which I'm not sure, but the veils would just, the dude walking around with a veil would probably be a little weird. But that's what it reminds me of anyway, is that Jesus is showing the full glory of who he is. And then Elijah and Moses appear, which, that's not normal. And they appear and they're talking to Jesus. And I'm like, what are they talking about, Mark? Come on, man. Mark, sometimes the gospel's ability to skip over details that I'm like, you didn't think that was important. Jesus is talking to Moses and Elijah, and you thought that was just a flyover thing. You're killing me, Mark. Now, understandably, the disciples are freaked out. They're terrified. Who wouldn't be? This is not a normal occurrence. You don't normally go down the street and just randomly see Moses and Elijah standing there chilling, right? Like, oh, it's another Moses and Elijah viewing. God, you guys, you died. Will you just stay? Like, it's not like that's not normal. This is supernatural. And truth be told, anything that's not normal frightens us. It doesn't even have to be supernatural. It just has to be outside the norm and we freak out about it. Because it makes us feel small and out of control. Right? Anything that happens that we don't expect, anything that happens that's out of the norm, that's out of the daily routine, that feels different, usually freaks us out because it somewhere deep in our subconscious it says, you don't control anything. Yeah, and sometimes it's an entire year that just screams from the rooftop, you're not in control. So Peter decides to do what many of us decide to do when we feel out of control. And that's do something to exhibit some control. And so Peter decides he has to speak. Only he doesn't know what to say because he's terrified. But Peter doesn't speak because he's prompted. He doesn't speak because the Spirit leads him to say something. He doesn't speak because he's got something to contribute. He speaks because he's afraid. And I gotta tell you, it's not gonna matter what he says because it's coming from fear. Anything he says out of response to fear is gonna be the wrong thing. But he needs to say something because his identity is lying to him. Peter is always a little brash and headstrong, right? Like he's always like act first, think later. Being brash and headstrong is something I can relate to. Because being brash and headstrong can be an identity itself. That can, like I can say that my identity is being brash and headstrong. I can find pleasure and revel in being contrarian. Always wanting to go against the grain. I can revel in having an opinion on everything. I don't even need to know what the thing is. I can give you an opinion on it. Maria will ask me a question about something that I have no idea, and I will give her an answer like I have been studying that for decades. She has learned how to notice the difference of when I actually know what I'm talking about and when I'm just pulling stuff out of whole cloth. And I'll be in the middle of it, be like, well, you know, I think, and she'll be like, just stop, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, how do you know? I take pleasure in gaining control of the situation. Because what happens is often taking control, being the contrarian, having opinions on everything, it often meets my need for significance. Jerry's living this with me right now. Now, Jerry, I didn't write this sermon for you. I wrote it for me. So it meets my need for significance because I'm saying, look at this contrary or strong opinion I have. That means I'm important. I have something to contribute. And I'm wondering if Peter wasn't the same way. That he felt like, I want to make an impression. I want to leave something behind. I don't want it to be said that something happened and I wasn't a part of it. I want to leave the note that says Peter was here. I mean, this amazing and terrifying thing is happening, and this lie, I wonder if this lie creeps into Peter's head. Do something, or you'll miss out. Say something, or you'll get left behind. Make your mark. And so Peter, it doesn't matter that he has nothing to say, because he's got to say something. It's the only thing he knows to do to make his presence felt. The only way I'm going to be able to participate in this is if I say something. He's Nuke Lelouch, wanting to announce his presence with authority, only to have his fastball hit the bull over the right field fence. That's a Bull Durham movie reference for those of you that weren't aware. Nuke Lelouch is a pitcher in the minors, and he wants to announce his presence with authority by throwing a fastball by this guy who's a first ball fastball hitter. And so he's like shaking off his catcher, and the catcher, played by Kevin Costner, comes out. What are you doing? I want to announce my presence with authority. Whatever. And he goes back and he tells the guy, fastball, here it comes. And so Nuke throws the fastball and the guy crushes it, and he hits a bull that sits outside the right field fence. And if they hit the bull, you get a steak. I like that movie. Anyway, that's Peter. Peter's there. I want to announce my presence with authority, and he's like, I don't know what to say. I'm going to say something. Here comes the fastball, and it gets rocked. Peter operates out of the false self-identity. He wants to make camp. He says, it's good for us to be here. I am not at all afraid. You know what? Let's make 3 dwellings for you guys. See what a thoughtful, smart guy I am? And totally not afraid. Peter isn't responding out of God's presence. This is a for God, not a with God moment, right? Like Peter is trying to participate in what's happening, but in a way in which he's not invited. He's only invited to witness. Like Peter, your only role in this whole thing is to bear witness, to see what's going on, so that after the Son of Man rises from the dead, then you can tell people. Your job is not to participate by talking or by setting up tents for people to live in and to stay here. But there's something driving Peter to run out in front of what God is doing. Maybe significance. And that drive that I must do something. Definitely fear. Not just at the supernatural event, but just a week earlier, Jesus had told them he was going to die. And so maybe it's, hey, if we build these 3 tents and stay here, then Jesus doesn't have to go to Jerusalem and die. But whatever the reason, when shown this, and I may be making this word up, this Christophonic event, which is maybe a word I made up, but it's built around this $100 seminary word, Christophany, which is simply the revealing of Christ's nature and character. There's the word theophany, which is when God is an appearance of God in his glory. Christophany is the appearance of Christ in his glory. So this is a Christophanic event. I got to throw these $100. I paid a lot of money for these $100 words. I got to use them. But Peter's response is to talk, even when he doesn't know what to say, and to set up camp, effectively denying Jesus' calling and purpose. If Jesus isn't going around manifesting and inaugurating the kingdom and leading to his death so that he can be resurrected, then you're preventing Jesus from doing the very thing he came to do. And so Peter is shut down. The voice within the cloud says, "This is my son, the beloved," which is a callback to Jesus' baptism. Listen to him. That is the participation that's required of you, Peter. You're not to steer the conversation. You're not to do something. You're to be here and listen to him, not the other way around. Now, it can be tempting. I don't blame Peter. I get it. It can be tempting to want to stay where God's revelation happens. When you encounter God in fresh and unique ways, it makes sense that you'd want to stay there, right? We've all had those experiences, whether youth conventions, where the Spirit of God just moved in and through you, and you were like, I don't want to go home. Church camps, spiritual retreats. Sometimes it's not even the overtly spiritual. It's like being in the Grand Canyon, or if you're standing on the beach overlooking the ocean. We'd love to set up a tent and just stay there. Like, let's just live here. Let's not go back down the mountain. I've been in the valley. I've seen what it's like. Let's stay up here on the mountain. This is nice. It's good that we are here. And in fact, we don't want to go back because going back to the mundane, going back down the mountain is jarring. Because you've come back and you've had this huge mountaintop experience. You feel like your life has changed. The world looks different to you. And then you go home and the world is the same to everybody else. Missionaries have that they call that culture shock. When they've been overseas for a long time and then they come back home, and it's the culture shock of coming back and there's been this change in them, but that's not in anybody else. I used to experience it coming home from college. Because we were living in California at the time. I was going to college in Indiana, and I would come home for the summer and come back, and I was a different person. I had all these different experiences, and my classes had rocked my world. My brain was exploded, and I'd had all this, I was different, and I came back and everybody was the same. And the town and the world that I left was the same because they hadn't taken that journey with me. So it's easy and tempting to say, let's just stay at the mountaintop. Because if I go back, no one's gonna understand it. The thing is that God is active and living. God is not an idol of clay or wood that stays where we put him. God meets us on the journey, not in the static. He meets us in reality, in the mundane, in the valley, as much as, and maybe more so even, than on the mountaintop. And so if we encounter God in one place, we go somewhere and we encounter God in that place, he's trying, what he's doing is trying to move us further along in the journey. And so if he has to meet us in the same place again, it's because we failed to move. We need to remember where our identity lies to us. Because when it lies to us, we lose our purpose. We lose our calling. We lose our journey. Here's where our identity lies to us. Not the lie it says, but here's where it does the lying. It does it when it's born out of fear. I feel like God is reminding me a lot of that recently. That our identity lies to us when it's born out of fear. I feel like I'm seeing that a lot. People operating out of an identity that's born out of fear. It's not that we shouldn't experience fear. Don't hear me say that. Like, it's okay, like it's normal and okay that we experience fear. And there are certainly times and places where having fear is a good thing. I've been reading the Chronicles of Narnia to Evie every night. And we just started the Silver Chair. And the first chapter ends when Eustace and Jill have just crossed over into Narnia, and they're on this giant mountain on this cliffside. And Jill, who's not afraid of heights, decides to show off a little bit and get really close to the edge until she sees exactly how high she really is. And C.S. Lewis describes it like, you're looking down about as far as you've ever looked down on anything ever. And then it's a little bit further. And then you see the white down there that you think at first may be sheep, but they're clouds. Not like little wispy, like fog, like actual billowy clouds. And then the ground is much further down beyond that, and it's actually further from the clouds below them than you are above them. And she starts understandably freaking out because that's where fear is good. You should have fear when you're that high up. Fear's telling you, don't do that, dummy. Get away from there. But fear usually helps us when it's life or death situations. Like, it's a throwback from when we were in, like, on the Serengeti or on the savannah, and there was a lion, and, that's not good. And so it's our brain taking over our conscious decision and saying, okay, is it better to stay here, run away, or fight? And that's good, that's fine. But when our fear is triggered by things that are not life and death situations, how many of us feel like we're truly afraid right now of a life or death situation? How many of us find that most of our fears are things that are not life and death? Yeah. Most of our fears are not life and death. So it's not just that we should never experience fear. It's also not necessarily that the right response is always the direct opposite of fear's choice. So if it's not even always the case that if I realize I'm afraid and out of fear I want my choice to be this, that then the right choice must be the direct opposite. So if I'm somewhere and my first response out of fear is to flee, that doesn't mean fight is the proper response either. But the thing is that fear rarely, maybe never, leads us to make the best choices. And here's the other thing. It is, and I will say this much less equivocally, fear is never the way to choose God. God does not need us to be afraid in order for us to choose Him. God does not need us to be afraid in order to lead us. In fact, I would argue God does not use fear. Here's the other place where identity lies to us, and it's in our need for either security, belonging, or significance. Because those are things we were created to seek, to want, to need. Like we're created to pursue those things. But we're created to pursue those things in God. Like we're created to pursue those things, but to find them in God. Like that's how God designed it, was that, look, you need security, you need belonging, you need significance, but those are things that I will provide you. You can trace this all the way back through the scripture, all the way back to Genesis. In the garden, God promised them security, belonging, and significance. And all they had to do was trust Him to provide it. But over and over and over again, we don't trust Him to provide it, and we seek it under our own strength. We seek it in our own ways. And when we seek those things anywhere other than from God, we're back to idolatry. And we're lying to ourselves. We're lying to ourselves when we think, my security is not, God's not going to provide security. I have to provide security for myself. We're lying to ourselves when we believe that God isn't going to bring me into a place of belonging, into a family or into a community. Instead, I'm going to have to create that myself. We're lying when we think I can be more significant without God than I will be by allowing God to work through me. This is where our identity lies to us. So remember instead where our true identity lies, which is in the love and grace and provisions of God. Your identity, our identity, is who we are. Your identity is who you are, not what you do, not what you have, and certainly not what others think of you. Here's the good news. You are God's beloved. If your identity comes from anywhere else, it is lying to you. Instead, remember that you are God's beloved. Peter eventually learns that. He eventually learns that. And he tries to teach the church that. Will we? Thank you for being part of our online family. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications for any future videos or content. And feel free to please share with a friend. You can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you feel so inclined and would like to donate and support our ministry, please click the donate button found in the description. Thank you, and God bless you.